Blog Talk Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Family Caregivers on Blog Talk Radio. I am Susan Baida, your host and co-founder of eCareDiary.com, the sponsor of this show. Today, the focus of our show is geriatric and home health care. So to help shed light on this, I am very pleased to introduce our distinguished guest, Barbra London, who is the Senior Vice President of Freedom Eldercare of New Jersey. Freedom Eldercare of New Jersey is a full-service, licensed healthcare company providing quality, compassionate home health care, geriatric care management, and elder care education for both families and professionals. Barbra has been in the geriatrics field for the past 25 years, and she has been the founder and president of the New Jersey Adult Daycare Association. She was also the opening executive director of an assisted living facility in New Jersey, as well as the executive director of a large geriatric care management firm. So if you have any questions about geriatric care management and long-term care, I think Barbra is our go-to person. Barbra, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Susan.
So, Barbra, for the vast majority of families out there, I think many of us don't understand what geriatric care management is, and even some of us, such as myself and my husband John, when we were in the throes of caring for my father-in-law several years ago, were not aware of geriatric care management help. So can you shed some light on that?
Yes, absolutely, and a lot of people are still confused about this excellent resource that can help people through what really is a very daunting myriad of labyrinth of services that are available. A geriatric care manager, a good one, a seasoned one, is usually either a nurse or a social worker of a higher level with a great deal of experience who can assist an individual and their family, whoever their family may be a spouse, maybe adult children, maybe a sibling, into addressing the levels and spheres that affect their life: medical, psychological, nutritional, financial, residential, religious. And through an assessment of what the client needs or wants, is able to create some kind of plan that could be short-term or longer-term, fluid or fixed, in a way that would help the client and family deal with the challenges that are posed by aging. And it's usually done through consultation. There are advocacy aspects of it, monitoring aspects, mediation when family members don't agree. It's basically to create a plan or some kind of map of where you need to go based on what's happening in the person's life at that moment.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation. And so what kind of qualifications does a geriatric care manager have? Like, what should families really look for in terms of education and certification?
There is the National Association of Geriatric Care Managers, so they should first check online and see that someone is legitimate. Very often the person's credentials would include having a master's prepared social work degree, an RN.
Meaning registered nurse, yeah.
Absolutely. Registered nurses are great resources in care managers. Whether it's a solo practice or a multiple professional practice can be even more helpful. Some practices have nurses and social workers, and sometimes the issue for the client or their family might present as a more psychiatric issue or a more medical or clinical issue. So a group practice that has both is even, multiplies your possibility for success. Right. And some people can use it very short term so that they know what the options are and are very capable of executing what's called a care plan. And some people are long-distance caregivers and can't be there. Therefore, monitoring and checking in can be a very valuable service that a geriatric care manager provides, even if it means, a professional taking an elderly person to a physician's office and knowing what the physician has said, because the older person may be panicked or not really hearing or understanding what the physician is expecting the client to do. So they serve as a go-between and a gatekeeper for a family that may be far away or close and just can't get to it.
So, for example, for example, let's say an elder woman lives in New Jersey, and her son, let's say her only son, who's in charge of her, who's her only, I guess, living relative, lives out in California.
Absolutely.
He can hire a geriatric care manager near his mother to basically help with her plan and attend appointments and such.
And be there for a crisis and let him know when it's appropriate to fly in from California, or when it's, a scare, but not something he needs to leave his life and job for. We've had clients whose family live abroad. And it's very hard, this long-distance caregiving, and it doesn't mean a lack of devotion. But in this very sophisticated society, children are not winding up where their parents are very often, and they want to be devoted. They just don't know how to do that from London. So it's a great, great idea for assisting long-distance caregivers, as well as those who are close.
Great. So a little later on, I also want to talk about costs. But I first want to talk now about home care, because I think there might be some confusion between home care and geriatric care. So would you do us the favor of explaining exactly what is home care?
Okay, and home care may be one of the most confusing services in the continuum of care to the elderly and their family, that even professionals, that even I didn't understand, being in the geriatric world for 20 years, the nuances of home care. And I must mention, since you reach a very broad national audience, that I can only speak to New Jersey, and one must really be checking the regulations in their state, because Florida is very different from New Jersey, as is California and North Carolina. Okay. So when I speak and I quote things, it will be New Jersey-based.
Okay.
Home care is, in the state of New Jersey, a licensed service. That's not necessarily the case everywhere. So that in the state of New Jersey, someone must make an application to the Department of Consumer Affairs. It is an accountable service where there are regulations within the industry that must be followed to be what would be considered in New Jersey a legitimate home care firm. Some of those things would include, Susan, only hiring legal caregivers, aides caregivers, we tend to call them at Freedom. Means that they have gone through training and an examination by the State Board of Nursing. Means that they are criminally records checked, that they are reference checked, that they are fingerprinted, and that they are supervised by a registered nurse. And then there are all kinds of regulations for what that registered nurse is supposed to do. The most important thing for family caregivers to understand is that these caregivers who are supervised by Freedom and other health services firms that are similar, is that they're our employees. We do it legitimately. We do it legally. We pay their taxes. We pay liability insurance. We train them. There is accountability to a registered nurse for their practice. Most importantly, we pay workman's compensation. So in the state of New Jersey, a health services firm is a private pay only offering to families who need any level of care. Some agencies can do a couple hours of care all the way up to live-in, or what we would consider to 12-hour shifts, which is round-the-clock awake care.
Right.
The other piece that can be done through a health services firm is Medicaid home care. And that means that someone in the state of New Jersey already has to have been qualified to be eligible for Medicaid. And people very often, I'm sure many of your caregivers, although I see it less, are very confused between Medicare and Medicaid. And I guess the little trick that I've tried to teach people over the years is Medicare has the word care at the end of it. It is health insurance, and it is a right to all Americans. There are a few deviations, but for the purpose of this conversation, it's a right of all Americans at the age of 65 plus to have Medicare, at least for now. We'll see what will happen in the future. Medicaid has the word aid in it, and AID means money, and that's usually tied to a means test so that people who receive Medicaid funding are indeed deemed to be in need financially of assistance from the state and government, as well as medically. Mm-hmm. Medicare covers a tiny, tiny bit of home care, generally subsequent to a hospitalization or in a rehabilitation facility, and post-rehabilitation, very few hours. And Medicaid is something entirely different and has to be determined by a case manager how much care the person is eligible.
Right.
Hospice service, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so Medicare will only cover temporarily, home care temporarily, as opposed
very short-term,
to long-term,
episodic related to a hospitalization.
Got it.
And that's the confusion. A lot of families have said, my goodness, my father, mother has been paying into the Medicare system their entire lives, and you're telling me that they can only get 2 hours of care? Yes.
Right.
And that's the shock that most families deal with. They have no idea how little is covered under Medicare.
Right.
So then there's also what's called registry home care, which is kind of like an employment agency. And what few people realize, including professionals, is that in the state of New Jersey, registries are illegal to hire home health aides. They are very legal for staffing or the placement of RNs and LPNs. However, many agencies in New Jersey promote themselves as home health agencies, and they're not. They're employment agencies, and buyer beware. Because no taxes are being paid, certainly no liability, and workman's comp is being paid. And when a caregiver is injured because your mother has fallen and she's fallen down with her and she's now injured her back, the employer is the family, and they would then be responsible for all the bills associated with that injury. Wow. So people really need to do their homework. And it's becoming harder and harder to decipher what's real and what's not, and what's legit and what's not. And that's a concern.
Can you recap what you just covered under home care? So it's private pay, and then there's you mentioned 3 different or 4 different.
There's private pay. There's Medicare. There's Medicaid. There is also private pay that can be covered by long-term care insurance if someone was wise enough to purchase that.
Right.
And then there are certain segments of home care that can be paid for by private insurance, but not by health insurance per se. Mm-hmm. And that's another misunderstanding of the public at large, that they can use their Blue Cross Blue Shield in certain very special circumstances. That's why it's so daunting, because there's so many minute exceptions. But I've seen, for example, retired teachers who were lucky enough to have some kind of clause that covered some home care. By and large, though, health insurance does not cover this.